Titanquest is an action RPG that combines the loot-driven gameplay of Diablo 2 with the setting of something like Age of Mythology. It first came out in 2006, but today I'll be taking a look at the 2016 version, which is the Anniversary Edition, which added a whole bunch of new features and brought some new textures into it to make it a bit more modern looking. Let me start off by addressing the elephant in the room. Yes, Titanquest is an older game and it shows. Of course, it's not fair to compare it directly to games that are coming out recently, like Diablo 4 is coming out soon, or Last Epoch, or even Path of Exile. It's not fair, but I'm still going to be doing that because it is 2023, and if I'm just comparing it to the games that came out back in 2006, then it's just going to be comparing it to Diablo 2, which, like, what's the point at that point, right? That said, the visuals are actually something that didn't bother me, and I kind of liked the way that the game looked. It was a little bit nostalgic, let's say. What I didn't love was the gameplay. It certainly shows its age, but there are ways to make it better, which I will definitely be getting into. I'm pretty sure that if I had played this back in 2007, I would have loved it. Unfortunately, 2007 was kind of my Call of Duty, Halo 3, and emo phase, so yeah, I missed out. One last thing before I really get into it, I did not purchase any of the expansions for this game. There are 3 expansions that you can buy. There's Ragnarok, there's Atlantis, and there's the Eternal Embers, I believe. Ragnarok brings in a new act. Atlantis adds a whole bunch of new features and some new content that is optional from what I understand. It kind of makes people don't quite love it. And then the third one, Eternal Embers, is only a super end game expansion, which is really weird. I didn't know if I would like the game in the first place, so I didn't buy any of them. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. So, the game starts off with a brief cutscene that sort of serves as the introduction to the setting of Titanquest. It's also the only cutscene in the game as far as I know, so this game isn't actually full of cutscenes a la Diablo, so keep that in mind. After the cutscene, the main menu appears and you can create your character where you get to customize them, and wait, nope, you get to choose between making a female or a male character and their tunic color. That's it. Not great, but it's an older game, you don't really spend too much time looking at your character, who cares, I guess. You don't even choose your class at this point, that comes later. Hit start game and your odyssey begins. You wake up on a farm and are immediately asked to save a horse from a group of satyrs. You beat them up with some basic attacks, the farmer thanks you, they drop some weapons, and you make your way over to the nearest town, which is super close, and it's one of many that you'll be finding on your adventure. Towns act as areas where you receive quests, can trade your gold for items at vendors and vice versa, and talk to locals to get a bit more information about the area. Your standard fare. Monsters drop loot like weapons and armors and rings and all that stuff, which you can equip. Different weapons have different attacks, which is important because depending on how you build your character out, you'll actually be spending some time using your basic attacks. There aren't a whole lot of skills in the game, to be completely honest. Once you reach level 2, you get to choose your first mastery or class if you prefer that. In the base game, there are 9 different masteries to choose from, but some of the expansions add new ones. Your options are Earth, which is a fire and rock focused mage, Storm, a lightning and ice themed mage, Warfare, a typical melee warrior based class, Dream, which is just like magical, I don't even know, CC maybe, Defense, which is a defensive class focused on using shields, Hunting, a standard range bow based class, you know, Nature, which is a healing and pet based class, and Rogue, a dagger focused melee class, which you'd expect. Oh, and lastly, Spirit, which is like a vitality undead focused caster. Kind of cool. I personally went for the Earth Mastery. I want to make like a pyromancer, so that's what I went for. I thought it would be cool, and man, that was a mistake. How could I have known that spellcasters are at a huge disadvantage in Titanquest, at least on your first playthrough? I couldn't have, but let me explain. There are different weapon types in Titanquest, right? You've got your melee weapons like your axes, swords, you've got your ranged weapons like bows, and then you've also got staves, which are like the magical weapons that most spellcasters will want to make use of. The way weapons drop in this game is that monsters are spawned with certain weapons equipped on them. So for example, there may be a centaur that has a bow equipped. When you kill that centaur, he is guaranteed to drop a bow. You don't know what quality it's going to be or if it's going to be a good bow, but he's guaranteed to drop a bow. This means that there's a predetermined ratio of different weapon types to others, and staves are so freaking rare, okay? There are not a lot of monsters that are spellcasters, not a lot of mages. I didn't know that the items worked this way, and that did hamper my experience. Was it the end of the world? No, but it wasn't fun. There were moments where I would go hours without finding an upgrade early on into the game. That's crazy. It is very immersive, I've gotta give credit to that. Like, it's a cool idea, but in practice, the balance is out of whack. Anyways, I didn't know that, so I chose the Earth Mastery anyways, and allocated this basic cone-style fireball skill. That seemed alright, I guess. Turns out it has a massive 5.8 second cooldown, so combat at this point consisted of casting my skill, maybe using some basic attacks, and running around kiting the enemies, waiting for the cooldown to end. All while chugging potions like crazy. Honestly, it wasn't very engaging. I kept playing, leveling up, doing quests and side quests, and slowly upgrading my gear, unlocking new skills, which did make combat a little bit more interesting, and eventually, 8 hours in, I was like, man, I don't know if I can keep playing this. There was one redeeming factor though. I had seen in the options that there was a setting called game speed. By default, it puts you on normal, but the other options are fast and very fast. I finally decided to try out the different settings. I put it on very fast, and holy moly, that changed the game completely. Suddenly, what felt like possibly the most boring ARPG combat I've ever experienced turned into something I could actually enjoy. Changing the game speed changes everything. Your run speed, your cooldowns, your casting speed, how often you can chug potions, and of course, how fast the enemies are too. Naturally, that meant that some enemy types were pretty OP because they just had like super speed attacks that you couldn't really react to on very fast, but I accepted it. It was okay. It wasn't a big deal. Also, considering you can change the game speed whenever you want on the fly, if you were really struggling with something, you could just change the game speed back to something slower and then try dodging the attacks that way. So, moral of the story, I recommend that you set the game speed to very fast from the get-go, unless you're brand new to the genre or really appreciate a slow-paced gameplay. But if you've been playing like Path of Exile, Diablo 3, anything like that, you're gonna want it on super speed. It makes the game so much better. Okay, now that I've explained all of that, let me get into the actual majority of my experience, the rest of the game, and how I proceeded to enjoy the game. Let's start off with the visuals. The graphics are obviously dated at this point, but that's to be entirely expected. The character models are blocky, the enemies are a little blocky, the spell effects look pretty good, if not amazing, and the environments actually look great in my opinion. All in all, I actually think the game looks really good considering it's an older game, and it has aged well, weirdly. I mean, some of the environments are really quite beautiful. You can tell that the game did a good job portraying the different settings your journey takes you to. There's ancient Greece, there's the Egyptian deserts, there's ancient China, and then later on Hades. In China, like there's a whole area where it's the Great Wall of China. I never thought I would be walking on the Great Wall of China in an ARPG. That's really cool. Another thing about the environments that I really enjoyed is that they don't all feel dark and gloomy like a lot of ARPGs tend to be. titanquest is a brighter game for the most part. You still have caves and dungeons like you'd expect, but there are actually a lot of grassy areas, beach areas, bright desert areas, stuff like that really balances out the experience. It's not all dark and grim all the time, which is awesome. I love the variety. It also helps that the game doesn't take itself super seriously. I mean, just look at this guy dancing. I don't know why he was dancing, but he's having a good time. Another thing, there's actually a day and night cycle in titanquest. I didn't expect that from an older game, especially. If you just stand around in town or any of the outdoor areas, you will see the sun set and suddenly you're in nighttime and it's harder to see things. Not so hard that you can't see, and it just, it makes the game so much more immersive. And titanquest certainly is immersive. Speaking of immersion, let's talk about music and audio. This game's music fits perfectly with the setting, and the ambient tracks that accompany it really blend well together to make it feel like you're in ancient Greece, Egypt, and so on. It's very immersive, and I never felt the need to turn it off, except for when I decided to do some grinding, which I did have to do. I'll get into that later. Contrary to what I just said though, Act 4's music really stood out in a good way. It wasn't just ambient thematic music, there was actual music that is fun to listen to, let's say. Real quick, if you're new to the channel and you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking the video and subscribing if you want more videos like this one. I hate doing this, but we're so close to hitting 5K subs. Let's make it happen. Okay, Let's talk about Titan Quest's story. As mentioned earlier, the game starts you off in ancient Greece, where you'll help locals by slaying monsters that have suddenly showed up as a result of lesser titans known as Telkines, summoning them in their attempts at releasing the greater titans from imprisonment. Before long, you'll make your way through Greece, Egypt, China, and even Hades to try and stop the Telkines. It's all very simple hero's journey type of stuff, inspired by actual mythology. There's no fancy cutscenes apart from that very first intro one I mentioned earlier. It's not a particularly gripping story, there's no character development. The character you play as is silent, doesn't have a voice, but it at least does a good job in giving you a good enough reason to go off and slay thousands of monsters, right? As far as world building goes though, I think they actually did a pretty good job. Of course, there's an absolute ton of material to source from, given that they basically straight up used popular myths and legends and put them in their game, but they did a good job of bringing them to life. An easy example of this would be the well-known legend concerning the Labyrinth and the Minotaur. At some point during your journey, I did have to make my way through the maze in order to confront the Minotaur, and it was well done. Normally, I would just rely on my map to figure out the way of where I need to go next, but specifically in this maze, your map is purposefully less useful. There are openings in walls, and walls where you don't think there are openings based on the map, which is confusing, but you can actually still use your map as a reference of where you're going around, and it's a really cool, clever solution to make you feel like you're able to get lost, but not quite get lost. I thought it was thematic and frankly, very clever. All NPCs in Titan Quest are voice acted, and honestly, they have pretty good voice acting. Some of their lines genuinely made me laugh.
It's not easy here. Try trading goods with all these women who can turn you into a mouse.
The game is witty, and I love it. Some towns have NPCs that will recite poetry to you depicting the actual real-life legends relevant to the plot of the story in that area, which I thought was super cool. Now, I didn't talk to or listen to every single NPC out there because I am generally more of a gameplay-first kind of guy, but if you are the kind of player that really likes getting immersed in the world, there are tons of characters that have interesting dialogue for you to seek out. The world building in this game is honestly impressive. They did a great job. If you want to feel like you're in ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, or ancient China, you're gonna like this game, I think. Now that we've talked all about the immersion and the story, let's get into some of the gameplay. Starting off with the controls, I had to rebind basically everything. The default controls are not something that I find comfortable these days. They are basically the old school controls where you're using 1, 2, 3, 4 for your skills. I've moved everything to QWER. That's just the way I play nowadays. Also, a quick note, you cannot bind move to left click without some hoops. I think you have to use like outside third-party solutions, which sucks. That makes it so that you're left clicking to attack things by accident if you just want to move around and run to safety. It is a bummer that that wasn't changed in the Anniversary Edition, but what can you do? It is nice that you can rebind everything else to different buttons, so kudos for that. As far as the pacing of Titan Quest goes, it's really weird. Act 1 felt like it went on forever. Certainly part of that is that I was playing on the normal game speed. If I had instead been playing on very fast from the get-go, it would have been a lot faster, I think, but I didn't, so it felt super slow. It was very sluggish. I wasn't even sure if I was going to keep playing, honestly, at that point. Act 2's pacing is actually really quite good. It went by pretty quickly. Act 3 I felt was kind of dragging on a little bit, and part of that is because I actually reached a point where I was kind of stuck. Enemies were killing me faster than I could kill them, and I had to go back and just farm for a little while, which I'll talk about how you farm in Titan Quest. Eventually I got strong enough to take on the rest of Act 3. It was pretty good. Like, that was the original ending of Titan Quest. Titan Quest Anniversary Edition actually includes an expansion just built into it, which is the Immortal Throne expansion, and that's what brought Act 4. Act 4 was awesome. Act 4 had so many different locations in it to experience, to explore, and that was super cool. I really enjoyed Act 4. I think it was my favorite part of the game. Also, it takes place in Hades, and like I could totally recognize locations and characters from the more modern game Hades, you know, that roguelike by Supergiant Games. Great game. Unlike other ARPGs, areas in Titan Quest are actually not procedurally generated and are instead carefully crafted zones with hidden caves and dungeons for you to explore. In fact, the game relies on your desire to explore all these areas in order to keep you on par with the experience level of the monsters. I, for one, didn't always do that, and I ended up falling behind, actually. Most caves and dungeons have high rarity chests at the end of them that have a higher chance of dropping good loot. Some even have hero monsters in them, which are basically stronger enemies that have also better chances of dropping good loot. I'm pretty sure that some of these hero monsters and chests are actually randomly spawned in whenever you load into the game, so there may be some variety in terms of what challenges you'll face from one playthrough to another. If you're the type of player that likes to completely explore areas before moving on, you'll probably have a great time with progression in titanquest. The game uses a difficulty system very similar to Diablo 2 and other ARPGs, so you start off on the normal difficulty no matter what. Then once you've completed Acts 1 to Act 4, or Act 5 depending on if you have the Ragnarok expansion, then you will unlock access to Epic difficulty, which starts off with monsters at level like 30 something or 40, so it's definitely harder. Then once you've beaten Epic difficulty, you go through the entire campaign again. Then you can go into the legendary difficulty where like monsters are super crazy and you need to have really good gear to do it. Now I, like for 99% of my playthrough, played just on normal. I did try out a little bit of the epic difficulty. It seems cool. It's actually faster paced than the Act 1 of normal because at this point your character actually has skills, which is great, and also has items that are starting to get interesting. I'll get into that. So the difficulty system is super old school. So you have normal, epic, and then legendary, and then that's it. There's no endgame progression system like maps or greater rifts in Diablo. There's nothing like that. There are some dungeons that you can only unlock in certain difficulties, so that's something that adds a little bit of new content to the different difficulties. Also, I believe that there are optional bosses that you can only fight in the higher difficulties as well. That's something I guess I don't really care personally. I didn't think that the campaign was so great that I want to go play it right away again. I might come back and play it again in the future, but not right now. All right, let's move on to all the different ways that you can customize your character to make them truly yours. Starting off, there's a dual class system, which is really cool. As I mentioned before, at level 2 you get your first mastery, but then also at level 8 you are allowed to pick another mastery. So you can specialize in 2 different classes essentially, which when you combine them together, you have your own unique class. For example, I chose the Earth Mastery and combined that with the Nature Mastery. Those 2 together creates the class called Summoner. Did I play it as a summoner? Absolutely not. Every time you level up, you get 3 skill points, and then some quests will also give you skill points. These can be placed inside your passive tree, which is your like mastery tree. You can choose to either slot those points into the skills directly or just into your mastery to level up the mastery. As you level up the mastery, you gain access to different skills. So you're gonna have to be putting points into your mastery and then also putting points into your skills that you want to unlock. And then most skills also have passive bonuses that you can put points into to kind of change the behavior of the skill a little bit. You don't have true free customization with your skills. You're pretty locked into what they do, but you can choose which ones you want to use. What's cool is being able to combine the 2 masteries. Now, one thing I will say though is that if you decide to put points evenly in between your 2 masteries as you're leveling up, I think you'll probably run into a bit of a hard time. You really need to make your skills powerful, and to do that you need to put points into them. What I ended up doing, I almost entirely focused on the Earth Mastery all the way until like Act 3 or something, when I finally decided, okay, let me choose my second mastery at this point, which is kind of weird. So you have your classes. You also have attributes. Every time you level up, you get 2 attribute points that you can put into strength, dexterity, intelligence, HP, and energy, which is mana. It's basic. You're going to need certain amounts of those points in each stat in order to equip gear. So you'll put points accordingly and then put the rest of your points into life, I guess. That's what I did. Lastly, there are resistances that you do need to worry about. And the normal difficulty, it's not super duper important, but you do want to have resistances to certain things like vitality damage because certain bosses are really strong and will hit you very hard. In the other difficulties, epic and legendary, they become super important. You need to have your resistances high up, otherwise you're in trouble. I found that getting a lot of resistances is nearly impossible in normal because gearing in normal sucks. All right, it's time. Let's talk gear. First off, gear in Titan Quest comes in 6 different rarities. You have your whites, your yellows, your greens, your olive greens, your blues, and your purples. Whites are basic items which have no affixes on them. Yellows have 1 modifier, greens have 2 modifiers or more. Olive greens, also known as monster infrequents, are special in that they always drop with a specific modifier on them, but they also have other random affixes on them as well, and they can only drop from specific monsters. Blues or epics are the equivalent of uniques in other games, having specific modifiers on them that don't change from one piece to another. Purples, also known as legendaries, are basically just way better epic gear. They don't exist in normal mode. They're super duper rare. You can find them in the higher tiers. What's more is that epics and legendaries cannot be crafted on to be further improved, whereas all of the rest of them can be. So there is a bit of decision making to be done there. I should also mention that there are item sets in Titan Quest that activate bonus mods once you have a certain amount of items from that set equipped. Set items only come in blue or purple rarities. Throughout my playthrough, I was swimming in yellow gear. I got a few green items that were usable, and very rarely I would get blue items, which I only really started getting once I was farming bosses. Legendary items did not exist. Unfortunately, I found most gear in Titan Quest to be pretty underwhelming. In my 30 hours playing this, I only found 2 or 3 items that I actually got excited for. One of these items was an amulet that gave me a ton of cast speed, making my spells come out much more quickly. The other gave me a load of stun resistance and skill disruption resistance, which also made it so that I didn't get stunned and killed really quickly. Kind of both of these did solve the same problem in my build. And the other item I got that was cool was a hat that has a chance of striking enemies with lightning whenever they hit me. The only thing is that I only got this when I killed the final boss of the campaign, so I did not make much use of it. Not to mention that the coolest looking gear in Titan Quest is all locked behind the epic and legendary difficulties, so throughout my entire playthrough of normal, I was looking like a total noob. I personally find that kind of lame. I like seeing the visual progression of my character, and the fact that you have to go through the game like 3 times in order to look cool is that's a downside for me. But I could see that acting as an incentive for you to maybe want to keep playing and do the higher difficulties just to be able to look cool. I have taken a look at endgame legendary items just to sort of see what kind of stats they have, if they seem exciting, if they seem cool. Unfortunately, to me, they don't really seem that exciting. Most of them are just generic damage increases. The most exciting items are items that grant new skills, and there are a couple of those, but there's nothing there that really makes me go, oh man, I really want to re-roll and try a different build out, which is unfortunate because that's part of the fun of ARPGs for me. As far as crafting in Titan Quest goes, there isn't much. You can put socketables into your gear, which are called relics and charms. These are target farmable from certain monster types, so that's kind of cool. Basically just give generic like stat bonuses, like here's your 10% piercing damage and resistance to vitality damage, and you can socket them into like your helmets, your chest piece, your weapon. They have predetermined item slot that they can socket into. However, there are mods that you can install on your computer to allow this to go on all of your different items, which might be interesting to you. The other crafting in this game is something called artifacts. Every now and then, monsters will drop like these little recipes that will list what you need in order to craft an artifact. Artifacts have their own slot in your equipment page, and you get to follow the recipe. You go to a certain NPC in town where you can then put the listed items that you need, then you just craft your artifact. It's just a basic recipe, 1, 2, 3, put these items in there and your item comes out, poof, you have it. That's the extent of crafting. It's nothing like in Path of Exile, nothing like in Last Epoch, not even like rune words like in Diablo 2, so meh, not super exciting. As far as combat feel goes, I don't know. It feels old. The animations are all right. Like the spell effects that I had on my Pyromancer were actually pretty cool. I didn't have any problems with them, but nothing really like stood out. I was like, wow, that is a super cool skill. Like, no. I did try out a melee character afterwards, and as far as I can tell, the skills that they gain access to are also very underwhelming. Like you have an attack where you just spin around and hit everything around you, and it doesn't look very impressive, but it does send monsters flying, so I guess that's cool. Mob density is kind of weird in this game. It feels a little bit sparse, but it's not so bad. Certainly early on, you don't want to be overwhelmed, and it is really easy to be overwhelmed by monsters in this game. What I ended up doing a lot though is, as a ranged character, I ended up kiting packs of monsters. I'd get them to chase me, and then I would use my skills and keep running away and try and kite them and, whittle them down that way, which, for the most part worked. Sometimes I would get overwhelmed and just get destroyed. One thing that I found super funny was you are constantly chugging potions in Titan Quest. And the way you get potions is you just buy them from a vendor. So all of these millions of gold that I'm making, I want to say 75% of it goes into buying potions, which I thought was hilarious. As far as quality of life things go, Titan Quest does have built-in item filters. They're not amazing. You basically just get to hide certain rarities. It's convenient though, it's better than nothing. Stash tabs are free, which is great. You can auto-sort your items in your inventory and in the stash tabs, so that's also really good. Your map is pretty weird. It's not like the transparent map that I'm used to. It actually just pulls up a map like in any other kind of RPG. It's not the greatest because it doesn't actually list what the name of the area is, and you can't just click between different areas and stuff like that. You just have to drag your mouse around and try and look at where you are. It's really hard to orient yourself. The map kind of sucks in this game. Also, the quest menu, the quest log, whatever, doesn't really give you a clear idea of where you have to go. It's all very old school, and some of you will like that. As far as multiplayer goes, I didn't really try it out at all. I believe it works in the same way that it did in Diablo 2, where you can host a server and then people can join, and you can just leave the server once you're done the run, repeat, make a new one, and so on. I don't know if it works really well. I don't know if it's got problems. I didn't try it out, had no one to play with, but I did look at the list and there are people playing. As far as mods go, there actually are quite a few mods for Titan Quest that you can download really easily if you're playing on Steam. And I think that if I ever do choose to play the game again, I will be doing so with mods. There are mods that change the drop rate of items. There are mods that change the experience gain rate. There are a lot of different mods to make the experience a bit more modern, so you don't have to grind as much. I think I would have enjoyed this game more if I had been playing with some mods that kind of make the game a bit faster, a bit less grindy. That would have been nice. I recommend that you look into it if you are the kind of player that likes playing fast-paced games. That might make the game more enjoyable. That's about it for Titan Quest. My overall impression, I enjoyed the game somewhat. I didn't love it. I really liked the environments. I really liked the humor. I liked the tone. The gameplay was all right, especially once I switched over to the very fast game speed. Super important. As far as the class customization and the items go, I was not blown away. It wasn't that interesting to me. But if you like an older style of action RPG a la Diablo 2, if you enjoy that kind of game, you are going to like Titan Quest, I assure you. If you're more like me, where your game needs to be fast-paced, you like blowing up hundreds of monsters within 10 seconds, I think Titan Quest might be able to be that game with mods, and in the late game possibly, at least in normal mode. That's not the way the game is. It's a slower game, it's a more methodical game. It's a super immersive game though. If you like to experience a cool world, especially this one based on actual mythology, then Titan Quest was pretty much made for you. Thank you again, Ramad, for the game recommendation. Let me know what I should try next under the like button, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day.